all the different audit examples, and then of course leaving time for Q&A. So here's the agenda to share for today's webinar: tips for a successful audit. And of course, if you have not yet done so, please sign up for our CSAC listserv so that way you are up to date with any changes, any to our policy, any deadlines coming up, etc. Okay, so let's start off with CSAC info and training. To start off with, I want to talk about our CSAC Student Success Blueprint goals. So, under the leadership of our Executive Director, Dr. Daisy Gonzalez, CSAC has implemented these three areas of our guiding principles for the CSAC Student Success Blueprint goals, which is equitable access, equitable support, and equitable success. We really want to be able to work on all of these different guiding principles to help support students as they navigate financial aid and higher education. And I believe that there are multiple phases, and we are about to implement, I believe, phase 2 of this blueprint. And also, as part of CSAC's plan to be a little bit more inclusive of all of our underserved student population, each month CSAC focuses on a specific cohort of students. We provide various resource links as well as hosting a designated webinar. And for the month of April, CSAC's focus is on Native American and Indigenous students. And unfortunately, this webinar that you're attending for Tips for a Successful Audit does coincide with the Native American and Indigenous students webinar that is occurring right now. But that webinar also should be recorded, and you should be able to access it on our CSAC website. And these are all the different links to help support the Native American and Indigenous students that we have pursuing higher education. Here is just a snippet of all the additional webinars that you can sign up for the month of May and June. You know, we host these weekly webinars just to support you, and if you need either a refresher or you're new to the financial aid world on various different topics, whether it's just an overview of Cal Grant 101 or specific for, transfer entitlement or our community college entitlement Cal Grants. You can find all the different webinars on our CSAC website. The link is down below. And as always, most of these webinars already have videos, and hopefully one of my colleagues can drop the link to all the different videos that you might want to check out on your own time if we don't have a webinar coming up. And for those financial aid administrators that might be new to the financial aid world or even just need a refresher, we have our Navigating Cal Grant series. You might recognize it as the Cal Grant Regional Trainings. This is essentially a three-part series that gives you an overall, guidelines of administering the Cal Grant. So you can see the breakdown of session A, B, and C. It talks about CSAC updates and talks about eligibilities, the cycles, renewals, as well as the payments and census, and of course, the reconciliation and program compliance process. Now, our next series is coming up in June. So even if you're able to only join us for 2 of the 3 series, and then join us for the September and November series as well. So you do get a certificate of completion by joining all 3 of the sessions. And if maybe after attending today's webinar, you still need a refresher, you want to look over the different slides, or if your colleague maybe was not able to attend, we do have a short little video on our YouTube page that you can watch. Friday's coming up. Nothing more relaxing than putting on a video on the Cal Grant reconciliation video, right? Open a bottle of wine, put out some charcuterie. I'm sure your partner will love you for that. Anyway, so let's continue and actually jump into the compliance process. In this part, we are going to cover essentially the audit process, right? Where we'll talk about risk analysis, the review process, and the different top audit findings. So what essentially is the goal of a compliance review? So reconciliation itself is the process of comparing all the different transactions reported by the school with the different transactions that's been accepted and reconciled by the commission. Now, reconciliation verifies that all the different Cal Grant funds have been dispersed to each student in the correct amount and that all the payments have also been properly reported to CSAC in accordance with the institutional participation agreement that all schools have already signed. Reconciliation is not really complete until the school's record match whatever the commission's records are exactly. It's an ongoing process throughout the year, not just something that you should save till the end of the year, right? And to confirm that all schools are in compliance with federal and state laws and regulations, our auditors always make sure to evaluate any findings and identify actions that schools must take to improve future administrative capabilities. Now, we want to make sure that you are always up to date with any sort of changes, any deadlines, etc. So, as I'd mentioned before, definitely sign up for our CSAC listserv, where you can receive any operations memo or special alerts that come out, and always stay up to date with your school's IPA. And of course, our Cal Grant handbook is readily accessible if you ever need to refer back to anything. All right, so what does that review look like? So we always focus on these general areas such as the general eligibility, applicant eligibility, all the different fund disbursements as well as the refunds part of it, any fiscal responsibility, information security and compliance, file maintenance and record retention, follow-up areas for any non-compliance. Now, it's not always just reliant on any financial aid, office. It really is a cohesive team effort, right? So we really should have you work with your administrations, your registrar, accounting, any additional office to make sure that, everything is as compliant as possible. It is not really just on your shoulders. Everyone should be working together to make sure that everything is up to date and following these guidelines. So, how are schools selected for audit? It's not unfortunately just picking a name out of a hat. All public community colleges, CSUs, UCs, as well as all the different private colleges are reviewed at some point. The colleges selected for review each year are usually determined using these risk analysis methodology, which takes into consideration whether, for example, it's a new school participating in the Cal Grant program, so they don't have any prior review before. Now, this isn't a bad thing. It's a lot of times it's so that any errors can be discovered early on, and that way, schools aren't, especially a new school, doing the same errors for years before it's caught, right? So this is not necessarily a bad thing. And of course, date from the last review. If it's been several years since your school's last review, oftentimes it means that you're probably due for another audit soon. Now, if your school did have an audit and there were numerous findings from a prior review, or maybe the pattern of inquiries about the school's financial aid or accounting practices are flagged, then of course the school might have a repeat finding, a higher risk of selected for another audit, right? And of course, there's the amount of collected liability from a prior review, the percentage of liabilities from the total received from the audit period, etc. So we would know that Cal Grant funds received for the award year. We want to make sure that we're getting the rosters as accurate as possible so that it matches what your school's roster has as well as what CSAC has. So that way there isn't a lot of errors. Now, the higher chance of errors means there's a higher chance that your school will be audited. What does that audit process look like? So let's go through those initial steps. So let's say if your school is selected for review, that initial contact is where your school will receive a phone call or an email from one of our CSAC auditors letting you know that your school's been selected for a review. So it's not just a sudden thing. They don't just show up at your school steps and announce that they're auditing. You will be alerted that there is an audit that is coming your way. Our auditor will provide your school staff with the review date, the review period, and normally, since COVID, all the reviews are usually conducted virtually, so using either Microsoft Teams or web grants to obtain and share documentation. A lot of times, if it is a virtual audit, it can be converted to a field audit if it is deemed necessary by both the auditor as well as management team. Now, the compliance review is an institution wide responsibility that will usually include staff from the financial aid office, admissions, registrar, accounting, or any additional offices. So, first, our auditors will let you know, when the dates are and what documents that you'll need. From there, you will receive that initial engagement letter. This will then confirm the review dates and itemize all the different information and documentation that the school needs to submit to the auditor. So these items could include, but are not limited to, your school's catalog, policies and procedures, your ECAR, your SB 70 verification, your web grant information security and confidentiality agreement and user forms, various accounting records. It could be an assortment of items, including Cal Grant student files. And so they will definitely itemize all the different things that they need. From there, they will have an entrance interview. That entrance interview will be conducted with the school staff who's responsible for administering all of the different commission programs. The auditor will explain what to expect during the review for the week and answer any questions to facilitate that review process. The next step is the document testing. So from here, since the COVID pandemic, since the audits are now conducted remotely, which can take anywhere between 2 to 3 months to complete, they will need to pull about 40 student files, and oftentimes this can be uploaded either via web grants or shared via Microsoft Teams. 40 student files are randomly pulled as a representative style samples from the different award cycles and types. For example, the auditor may request to review a handful of records from your E1, E2, E3, competitive, your student with dependent, your foster youth access cohorts. And then based on those records examined, the auditor may discover administrative or reporting errors, and those are what we call findings. From there, they will have an exit interview. So the auditor will then conduct an exit interview with the school staff to summarize the outcome of the review. From there, the draft report, which is usually a 60-day process, CSAC will then mail the school a draft report of any findings. This will include a peer review as well as a management review. And nearly to the end will be the review report, which is where the institution is able to review that draft review report, identifying all the different areas of noncompliance and required action. The schools will then have 30 days from the receipt of the draft review report to provide a written explanation and any necessary supporting documentation. And then, of course, the last part is the final report and the closure. So after all the different outstanding issues have been hopefully satisfactorily resolved, the school will receive a final report closing the review. So I just want to point out that if there's any institutions that do dispute or intend to appeal the findings, they do have to pay any outstanding invoices before an appeal will be reviewed. And so this is the process. It does take a while. It's not a quick and easy process where, after a week your audit is done. It does take a few months, and our auditors are wonderful and will be supportive and communicate every step along the way. So what are some keys to a successful review? We recommend that you just reconcile your Cal Grant funds on a weekly or a monthly, but preferably a weekly basis, right? We know that year-end reconciliation seems to be being pushed up earlier and earlier. And so, don't wait until closer to year-end reconciliation to figure out if all of, everything matches up. If you're reconciling your account grant funds on a weekly basis, that would be so helpful towards year-end reconciliation. Keep all your files organized and hopefully have a clear audit trail. You're always going to hopefully have chronological history of all the different receipts of your funds, student payments, your refunded monies, etc. Make sure that you're keeping any institutional information up to date within web grants with your demographic information, contact information, cost estimate screens, etc. If you have any changes in staff, you can always update that as well. And then, of course, we have additional steps such as perform self audits, attend our CSAC trainings, workshops, and webinars, such as you're doing right now, collaborate with all the different offices such as admissions, accounting, etc. And that way you are always in the know of what is going on at your campus. And then, of course, you can always regularly review your own desk manuals, your campus policies and procedures, update them as necessary. If you have any changes, I know that oftentimes CSAC does implement new changes, such as a few years ago we introduced SB 150, which allowed students the opportunity to bring their grades up before losing their Chafee funds. So that definitely needed a change to your school's policy. A few years ago, we also changed that Chafee grant was no longer considered an other financial aid. It's now automatic for eligible students, regardless of unmet need. So as CSAC is, making our changes, we are hoping that you are also implementing these in your school policy. And of course, as you get new staff, make sure you're thoroughly training them. The financial aid world can be quite a lot of information, a lot of new steps, especially for someone that might never have been in the financial aid world. So make sure that they're going through the process of training of everything that your school might have, but also everything in terms of administering the Cal Grant. So have them sign up for the Navigating Cal Grant series, have them sign up for any of the weekly webinars that would be helpful to them. They can utilize our training video library, etc. So there's lots of ways to make sure that the staff get all the information they need, especially, as you might, have staff members getting ready to retire. We want them to be able to pass on whatever knowledge that they have to the staff members that will take their spot. All right, so what are some top audit issues? So Adrian is going to go over these more in detail, so I'm not going to go over too much, but this is a lot of the top audit issues. For example, grade level policy, where we're focusing on EL, education level, whether SAP is not in compliances with Title IX or AB 789, incorrect Cal Grant payment, whether the enrollment status or the census date doesn't match what the student's payment is, etc., or if there's no written policies and procedures at your school, or maybe not following any written school policy, etc. So there's also any grant record change. MG21 is not submitted, such as that's the form that we use anytime there's any changes to a student's account, whether it's a change to household size, their income and assets, etc., so that we can either reprocess them for an award or their award might get withdrawn. Then, of course, there's the reconciliation process, and then non-compliance with information security and confidentiality agreement, making sure that if someone leaves your site, you're always disabling their web grants access, making sure that you create web grants access for a new user or sharing login credentials with them, and they would only have their own login credential. So these are just some top audit issues. Adrian will go over a lot of these in detail in the next half of the webinar. And of course, policies and procedures. This slide just essentially lists all the different policies that schools should have in place to properly administer the Cal Grant program. So ensuring that your campus has these written policies will help establish good practices and will increase the likelihood of a successful audit. So we want to make sure that you have in place how to administer the Cal Grant program, right? So ensure that your institution is following the Cal Grant handbook and your own campus policies wherever applicable. The award packaging procedures, on occasion there are going to be legislative changes to federal and or state aid that might require former policies to be updated or new policies to be drafted. So make sure you're always staying on top of the news from CSAC, FSA, NCAN, NASFA, CASFA, etc. Every CSFA and other trusted educational institutions. Then, of course, there's the verification process for FAFSA and CADA. We do have standard verification processes for federal aid that can impact a student's California state aid eligibility as well. So it's important to know that CSAC follows federal standards in many cases. There's also an AB 840 at the state level, which will randomly select anywhere between 10 to 20% of your FAFSA and CADA application for additional verification. Then we have our state residency determination. This is where CSAC will make that preliminary award based on a student or the parent in the case if the student is under the age of 18, having lived in California for at least 1 year and 1 day. However, I know that a lot of schools might have a different policy. So I know that some schools might use the 1 year before the first day of class rule, and others use other different criteria. So make sure it is stated in your school policy. And of course, we have our education level policy, and the purpose of having this is to make sure that the students receive the full duration of the Cal Grant that they are eligible for. So EL and Cal Grant eligibility are oftentimes, intermixed. For example, for high school seniors as they graduate and they start college, their EL is EL1, right? They're starting college, they're EL1, they should have 400% or 4 years of Cal Grant eligibility and so on, right? And so from there, it's a matter of them students earning enough units, and maybe if they transfer, that is where it's important for the 4 year universities to verify EL, especially for those who have transferred to their university. And then we have payments and disbursements. This is, where you are essentially paying your students. Now, if you're new to this or want a refresher, we do have a designated webinar called Payment Codes and Scenarios. That's also one of the sessions of our Navigating Cal Grant series. And so we definitely go into more details in terms of how to do that, all the different payment and adjustment codes. So definitely seek that out. And last but not least, for policies and procedures, definitely include refunds. So when there is a federal return to Title IV funds, or we refer to that as R2T form, when that's performed, it could in some instances necessitate refunding some Cal Grant funds back to the Commission. So your refund policy must state that if a Cal Grant refund is required, the student will be made aware of how the refund amount will be calculated. We do have this all in our Cal Grant handbook, so you can definitely go back and refer to that. All of this should also be a part of your institutional participation agreement, so you can always refer to that. And if there are any changes, make sure you're updating your school policy as well as your school's IPA. And of course, just another reminder, if you haven't yet done so, sign up for our CSAC listserv so you are receiving all the up-to-date CSAC communications, if there's any changes to programs, any deadlines coming up, anything that needs to be submitted, etc. And of course, periodically review and update your institutional policies as needed. If there's any changes, definitely update that and to your school policy as well as the IPA. All right, and then of course adjusting refunds. So if your school determines that a student is eligible to keep a portion of their Cal Grant funds, the student's enrollment status should be adjusted so the student uses the least amount of eligibility. Whether, for example, a student was paid full time but earned portions that falls under the half part-time equivalent. So from there, make sure you're making any adjustments so that really the student uses the least amount of eligibility, and the adjusted tuition and fees dollar amount cannot exceed the actual tuition amount that's been charged. And some of the benefits of an audit finding. So this is not all necessarily a bad thing, right? The benefits is that your school is learning and identifying any sort of deficiencies. If there are deficiencies, let's work together to fix them and make your campus stronger, your policy stronger. It is a learning opportunity. This is a really great way to enhance your different practices, strengthen all the different internal controls, improve any financial record keeping, credibility, and transparency, making sure that operational efficiency and compliance is up to date. This way, we're communicating with stakeholders, you're communicating with your stakeholders, everyone is on the same page. So there are lots of different benefits to audit findings. It kind of just makes us, um, you know, clean up, making sure that everything is nice and neat and working efficiently. Now, we do know that there are some potential consequences of these audit findings. So, of course, there might be repayments of any ineligible funds that have been dispersed. If a school does have some audit findings and are considered either at risk or not, they would have to do additional mandated training, whether it is specific to the audit findings or whether staff members have to attend our next Navigating Cal Grant series, etc. But if your school is deemed at risk, please know that your campus would be monitored over a 2-year period and then re-audited at the end of that period. And we don't ever want it to get to this point, but you would have the loss of eligibility to administer the Cal Grant program. So we don't ever want to get to that point, and that's why we always are working with all of the different schools, and we are here to support you in any way that we can. So that pretty much wraps up my first half of today's webinar, Tips for a Successful Audit. I hope you are asking questions in the Q&A window. My colleagues are on the line to answer any questions. I am going to hand it off to Adrian. We're not going to have a quick break. We are already halfway through the webinar, so plenty of time to hopefully ask questions and get you guys out of here in a timely manner. So I'll hand it off to Adrian. Thank you.
Thank you, Mina. Like Mina said, my name is Adrian. I'm one of the trainers here, and I'm going to take you through the audit finding examples. So let's go ahead, and before I go any further, just give me a quick thumbs up. Make sure you guys can hear me loud and clear. All right. So without further ado, let's jump on into some audit examples. So Mina did talk about education level being one of the many findings that occur. So let's take a look at an example of what a EL audit would be or what could occur. And usually this occurs with newly awarded students that self-report their education level, but it's self-reported incorrectly. So for this example, we have a newly awarded competitive awardee that self-certifies as an EL3. But to further this, we're going to say that they are a transfer to your school, and not all of their unit work at their previous schools actually transfer, or you accept them through your school policy as transfer credits. So when you do the work, you find out that the student is actually a EL1. So why would this be an issue? If you make a disbursement before verifying the education level, a couple of things can occur. First is the student would be assigned the incorrect number of years of eligibility of their award, because a EL3 student would only be eligible for 2 years of Cal Grant Award eligibility, while an EL1 gets 4 years of eligibility. So, as you can see on the screen, the student would, I'm going to air quote it, lose 2 years of eligibility. A second thing that could be is your school is, your policy is, hey, and especially with our community colleges, that we only go up to an EL2. So again, that would be in conflict. And another thing that we do see at our 4 year schools is when a student has a Cal Grant B, if they're EL1, they're only eligible for access. But anything above that, 2, 3, or 4, they can be eligible for tuition and fees. So again, if you pay, say, on that student's award and they have the incorrect EL3, you could actually potentially be over awarding the student. So this can actually be corrected. So basically what you would need to do is you would need to, if it was a overpayment, you would have to actually go ahead and refund that tuition and fee, because in this case the student is EL1, and with Cal Grant B they're only eligible for that access portion. So you would have to refund the tuition and fee portion before making that change, as you can see, which can be done either through your roster or an MG21. But actually, what I want to say here is this is going to be, this problem with the overpayment is going to be a thing of the past for the coming 26-27 academic year, because we are going to implement now, because previous, you could pay the first term of a student's award before being forced to actually make a EL verification for the spring term. But going forward, again, starting next academic year, you will be forced to verify that education level before you make that first payment. But the reason I bring this up is traditionally our audits are for 2 or 3 years previous. So this can still be an issue because, again, even though the problem won't exist for the coming years, it could be an issue that is recognized during an audit because, again, we're auditing previous years. And as you can see on the bottom, this can also come up as multiple findings from this one error. But what I like to say is, and what's going to be going forward is, please go ahead and verify the education level prior to first disbursement to make sure you do not run into this issue. Second is SAP AB 789 policy not implemented. And what this is, and it's tied to, again, satisfactory academic progress and just, again, the school not processing the student for SAP before making a disbursement. So some of the things that could come up are the student did not meet the satisfactory academic progress, thus not being eligible, or the school did not place the student on a warning or disqualification for that term. Also, degree applicable transfer units are not calculated into that SAP calculation. Also, SAP can be or is being calculated incorrectly. It's being calculated, say, on a per term basis versus cumulative. And also sometimes the thresholds around PACE, GPA, max time frame are not being held to federal standards. So some of those things being 150% max time frame, that you are tracking this cumulatively, not per term, and all earned Fs must be counted. So what we say is, please, if you find this, to update your SAP policies to bring yourself up to the federal minimums. And just a quick asterisk is Chafee grant students are held to a different SAP requirement known as SB 150. So we're going to talk about SAP for one more slide here, but just want to say that Assembly Bill 789, which was passed in October 2023, was signed, and it does require Cal Grant eligible institutions to adhere to a common set of SAP standards and develop and implement policies that are consistent with federal standards. So, what this is saying is schools cannot have SAP policies that are more stringent than the federal standards. In addition, AB 789 also stipulates that students must receive written notifications of how to explain the financial aid appeals process, how to file an appeal, and how to request a second review if their appeal is denied, and thus must be conducted by a different reviewer. Also, the flexibility to establish additional qualifying special circumstances, i.e., pregnancy related complication or challenges, what this does is it allows additional special circumstances to be considered pursuant to California Education Code, and schools can waive requirements for third-party documentation if it cannot be reasonably obtained. And all this centers around a report that was released back in 2021 titled The Overlooked Obstacle. And that found that 24% of first-year community college students receiving Pell did not meet satisfactory academic progress during their first two consecutive academic terms. The report also found that students who did not meet those standards had significantly more life responsibilities, such as childcare, job demands, and also had fewer resources, including access to food and housing, flexible work schedules, and reliable transportation. So again, the AB 789 is just trying to make the access to financial aid more equitable to all students, no matter what their life situations are. Next is income levels exceeded, and this occurs when students we go ahead and award them on, say, ICER number 1, but later during say a verification, or maybe the student comes in and talks to you and you find that there's a change to, say, their household size or the income that is reported, and then this makes a subsequent ICER a necessity, but you dispersed your the financial aid to the student using that first ICER, and that can be an issue because, again, we need to know those changes because that can actually lead to them being disqualified. So what we want you to do is, if again there is a change in any of that information, to submit to us a grant record change and let us know of the subsequent ICER so we can reevaluate the student's eligibility prior to disbursement. Also is verification not completed or conflict not resolved. And this also can result in an overpayment of Cal Grant Award funds if the disbursement was made without performing the standard verification. So that is tied to, again, this last slide. Another is payment and census. And this is something big because if you make payment prior to census, you have to go back at your census date to ensure that the student has not, dropped classes, because that would then necessitate you to recalculate and possibly change their payment. And this is something that also you should have in your school's policies of when your census dates are and how you will treat your disbursements as far as will we disperse prior and then go back and reevaluate, or do we hold till census? Again, that's something that the proper handling is, again, to make sure you have that in your policies and procedures. And again, if you pay before disbursement, that you do again have a second time at or not at disbursement, at the census date to reevaluate the students to ensure that again their enrollment status that you paid is what their enrollment status is at your census. Now, this is suggested guidelines. And as you can see, before census, again, you'll pay at the time, the enrollment at the time of disbursement, but you will need to, again, revisit that at your census date to make sure that there is no change. If you choose to pay at census, again, you would just use the enrollment status at the census date. If it's after census, again, you can use the enrollment status at the time of census or enrollment time at the time of disbursement. And this applies to, again, say students that the biggest ones are they're a late add to your roster, recycled competitive awardee, or again, the student did not have complete bringing in all the documentation to complete verification, and then later they then bring that information in, then you would then be able again to pay them at the enrollment status when they complete those enrollment or not enrollments, those verifications. Another one is funds not reconciled for the award year. And sometimes we see Cal Grant advance funds as a pot of money to be used to begin to make payments without confirming student eligibility. But effective this academic year, 25-26, this is no longer an issue as we no longer do fund advances, and we only pay once you make a request. So again, you process your students, you go into web grants, you then pay the student, and then we then give you the funds, or what we like to call supplemental payments. And per our IPA, institutions are required to reconcile payments within 60 days of the end of the payment period, aka the terms. And interest earned, not returned by the deadline. And now that fund advances are no longer provided, interest accrued may be very small, but again, these are state funds and the interest must be returned. And just to let you know, even if it is 12 cents, you would have to send that 12 cents in. So interest remittance is due March 1st for the prior calendar year. It is not tied to the school year. So, i.e., interest earned on Cal Grant funds between January and December 2025 must have been remitted by March 1st of this year. So we do have some best practices here. First is to perform a student-by-student reconciliation so you can understand the impact to student eligibility beyond the dollars. Rather than do a total dollar reconciliation, it is essential to reconcile on a student-by-student basis to drill down and identify individual discrepancies. Complete verifications before disbursements. So, things like ICER conflicts, census, education level, these are some of those things that, again, can make an issue. But if you do these verifications before you disperse, you will cut down on having to, what I like to call, do rework. Weekly Double-check reported payments for accuracy and real-time changes to full-time, quarter-time, half-time, and SAP, as statuses can change quickly around qualitative and quantitative pace enrollment, remaining eligibility, and recording frequently mitigates small mistakes. Check the different reports that Web Grants provides you to confirm that all eligible students were paid and that all terms were satisfied with a payment or renewable transaction code. Now, we want to also make sure we are looking at the differences between how federal aid and state aid is administered. Now, they share some common practices, but also have distinct program requirements. So, as an example, general Cal Grant eligibility mostly follow federal requirements, but differ for our DREAM Act applicants and may not meet U.S. citizenship and are allowed under AB 540. In addition, federal regulations do not require GPA while Cal Grant does. And federal Pell Grant awards students who attend an eligible college anywhere in the U.S. versus Cal Grants only for Cal Grant schools, which are again in California. Also, you need to periodically review and update institutional policies as legislative changes drive and inform campus policies and practices. Also, stay up to date with the communications from the Commission. I know Mina said it twice. I'm going to say it 3 times for good luck. Please, if you're not already signed up with our listserv service, please go ahead, sign up, because that's how you will stay up to date and in what I like to call the know. And last but not least, the financial aid office, accounting, and other campus departments should work hand in hand because the sharing of information leads to compliance with the Cal Grant program. Now, if you signed up early, we did send out a PDF of today's presentation that includes links to our Cal Grant handbook, also registration link for future webinars, and all these different good things like social media toolkits. And if you did not receive that, just go ahead, give us send us a quick message at the training email box, and we'll go ahead and get that to you. And as you can see right there on the very top is that training email. If you have any other questions after today's presentation, you can also contact our school support team. There you go with the email and number. And if any of your students need any assistance, at the very bottom there is their contact information, email, and phone number. All right. So I'm just quickly seeing if we have any open questions. Looks like we do. All right, so the first one's already being answered. Looks like the second one is being answered. Let me read this third one real quick. All right, so it looks like Sandra is asking, and I'm going to read the question. When it comes to the reporting for EL, for E1s, some students take community college courses while attending high school, and those units are transferable. So would the expectation be to report freshmen or based on the transferable units? And that's actually a very good question. And in that case, you would still use those to calculate where they are, but unless they have taken a lot of those concurrent courses while in high school, chances are they haven't taken enough where they would be seen as anything other than freshmen. But as we all know, there may be, one or two students who meet that 24 units to be, or well, over 24 units to be considered a sophomore. So yes, you would still count those, but like I said, the chances of them having that many, I would say, are the percentage is low. But yes, you would go ahead and consider those when calculating for education level. Is there any other questions? Anyone want to put their hand up, ask a live question? Going once, going twice. All right. Well, I think we are good to go here. We're going to stay on just a little bit longer while we finish answering the question. So at this point, I'm going to mute myself, but before I do, I just want to say thank you everyone for being here, for all the hard work that you guys do. And again, if you have any questions, as you see, this is our contact info. And again, do not hesitate to contact us. But again, thank you for being here, and hopefully we will see you at one of our coming trainings.